welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where we are spending our second week in a row in the Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young extended universe. Thrill me to the marrow. This is because, in addition to its many other observances, February, the month of February, is where we find the World Day of Social Justice. That's on the 20th, for those of you who are interested in observing this observance. I thought this would be a great opportunity to explore the role of music in the pursuit of a better world. As such, we are going to briefly look at the history of the protest song. We're going to have a quick listen to Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young's iconic song, Ohio. We're going to examine what happened to the protest song in contemporary music, and we're going to speculate as to its future. Before we start, I would just like to quickly note that the history of protest music in African American history is extremely rich and fully deserving of at least one of its own episodes. That is not what we're going to be covering today. That's my only disclaimer. Seatbelts buckled? Let's go. So I suppose the first question to answer is, what is the protest song? In the simplest terms, a protest song is a composition that is linked to a movement for social change. It has a few defining characteristics. The first, according to my rubric, is that it can be easily recycled and is often an interpolation of another song. We're going to take, for example, Pete Seeger's Where Have All the Flowers Gone?, which he wrote in 1955.
Where have all the flowers gone?
It came from 3 lines of a Russian song. Where are the flowers? The girls have plucked them. Where are the girls? They're all married. Where are the men? They're all in the army. A year later, somebody said to me, Pete, you thought you wrote those lines down, but you remember you were singing an Irish-American lumberjack song? Johnson said he'll load more hay. Says he'll load more 10 times a day. All I did was slow it down.
Another songwriter picked it up and turned it into a circular song in 1960. And from there, it was recorded by a number of artists, including but not limited to the Kingston Trio,
Young girls pick them, everyone.
Peter, Paul and Mary,
Born for husbands, everyone.
Harry Belafonte,
They're all in uniform.
Roy Orbison,
Gone to graveyards, everyone.
Earth, Wind and Fire, Bernie Sanders.
When will they ever learn?
It was interpolated again, the inspiration for Green Day on their 2004 protest album, American Idiot. You can hear its influences in the song Letter Bomb.
Where have all the bastards gone?
Protest songs will also have a mission statement, a central thesis. It'll have a memorable title to support that thesis. It will be a song that works well when sung by a crowd, or would theoretically work well when sung by a crowd, which means that it's got a simple, to the point, easy to sing, impactful chorus or refrain. It has clear, stark imagery, and most importantly, it's coming from a place of sincerity, of authenticity, of honesty. So let's turn to Messrs. Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young to show us the ropes. This part of the story takes us back to May 4th, 1970. The students at Ohio's Kent State University had been protesting for a few days by this point because Richard Nixon had just announced that US troops would be invading Cambodia, in addition to their involvement in Vietnam. On May 2nd, Ohio Governor James Rhodes called in the National Guard to wrangle the protesters. There had been a large protest planned for the 4th of May, and on that day, a young photographer by the name of John Philo, an undergraduate student, grabbed his camera in the hopes that he might find some interesting pictures. During the protest, the students were ordered to disperse or be arrested. When they refused, the National Guard fired tear gas into the crowd, and then the National Guard moved uphill, appearing as though they were retreating. When they got to the top of the hill, instead of retreating, they turned on the crowd and they fired at the students with their guns, not the tear gas. And in approximately 13 seconds, they had fired just over 60 rounds. At the end of it, 9 students were injured, 4 students were dead. And of those 4 students, only 2 of them were actually protesters. The other 2 had just been walking to class. John Philo, you'll remember him from slightly earlier, the young man with his camera, happened to catch an incredibly impactful image of a 14-year-old girl kneeling over one of the bodies and screaming. Hello, this is your emotional safety correspondent. I'm new to the channel, but listen, we spent a lot of time thinking about whether or not we would show this picture, and we've decided that ultimately it's pretty central to the story of this episode. And while it is pretty ubiquitous and fairly well known and won a Pulitzer Prize, it is still kind of graphic. So if that's not something you feel like seeing today, I understand. You can just skip ahead a little bit. Take care of yourself. That photo appeared in Life magazine a few days later, and by way of that magazine, it ended up in the hands of one David Crosby. R.I.P. King. Horrified, he showed it to his bandmate Neil Young.
And I watched it hit Neil. He opened the magazine and looked at this thing and hit him in the heart.
Who picked up his guitar, walked off, and in a matter of minutes had written Ohio.
I called Nash and I said,
Neil has written this song, you're not going to believe it. We've got to get in the studio
now, right now.
right away.
No, not after breakfast, now.
Stephen and I booked the record plant here in Hollywood.
They were in the recording studio nearly immediately, or as immediately as you can, book a studio and get the whole band in there.
It might have been the night of the morning that he wrote it.
And in about 12 days, the song, the single, the B-side, all of it was released to the public, released to the radio. It reached number 14 on the Hot 100. Let's give it a listen. Right. Okay. I've chosen the song that we're about to listen to today for a variety of reasons we don't really need to get into, but suffice to say it is one, an excellent exemplar of all of the hallmarks that we just discussed, and two, it's so friggin' cool. Let's go through some of these hallmarks. Now this is maybe a weird starting place because this isn't one of the hallmarks mentioned, but the song is good. I think that's kind of important. People have to like the song. And how could you not when it starts like this? We've got our direct title. The song's called Ohio. It is about Ohio. It is about what happened in Ohio at this point several weeks ago. You're not going to forget what the name of the song is. It's not convoluted. You get it. It has clear, stark imagery. It would work well if sung by a crowd. It has this infectious, unforgettable, repeating refrain. For dead in Ohio. And that refrain, For Dead in Ohio, is what sees us out of the song. For dead in Ohio. I wouldn't say it's a mission statement as such, but there's a point to it. There's a link to the social movement that is behind it. It's a spread awareness kind of a protest song, and to create a sense of solidarity among people who had experienced it, whether there or just as they were reading Life magazine on a Sunday morning. And the last thing, of course, is that sincerity, that authenticity. And I think you can hear that in the delivery of David Crosby's ad-libs at the end of the song. I'm making a mess of myself this episode. It's the why at the end. Gets me every time. I'm gonna get a tissue. Well, hey, at least I'm in good company.
And I'm screaming for and why at the end. I'm damn near in tears.
Apparently David Crosby left the studio in tears as well. So, it's not just me. I wonder what's next on this record. Find the Cost of Freedom.
Buried in the ground.
Historically, political unrest has been accompanied by what I think are some great protest songs. And that brings us to the focal question of this week's episode. Where have all the protest songs gone? In my humble opinion, to media consolidation, corporatization, and the attention economy. When will they ever learn?
When will they ever learn?
Let's start with media consolidation. Specifically, we're going to talk about radio. In 1996, the Clinton administration implemented some changes to the FCC, that is the Federal Communications Commission. Yes. Previously, there had been limitations on how many radio stations a single entity could buy and own. These new changes in 1996 relaxed those regulations, and consequently, radio stations across the United States and eventually the globe came to be bought up by large companies, and those companies rapidly swallowed their competition whole. Let's take the example of iHeartMedia, formerly Clear Channel. I'm going to do this very quickly because it's incredibly tedious, but stick with me. Here we go. R. Stephen Hicks and Hicks Muse Tate First began Capstar Broadcasting in 1996. A year later, they'd become the largest owner of radio stations in the country, with 243 stations in total. In 1997, they announced plans to acquire SFX Broadcasting, with the resulting company owning 314 stations in 79 markets. A year later, Chancellor Media Corporation and Capstar Broadcasting Corporation announced a merger that would result in Chancellor owning 463 stations in 105 markets. Blah, 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 blah. Chancellor Media is acquired by Clear Channel in 1999. The deal was valued at $17.4 billion, and the resulting company would own 830 radio stations, 19 television stations, and over 425,000 outdoor displays in 32 companies. So all of those little independent, funky radio stations with their big DJ personalities, with their specific musical tastes, they all got snaffled up by these mega corporations, which in turn became snaffled up by even bigger mega corporations. Those DJs became playlisted. So if these stations even kept their DJs on, their role went from curating music to hitting play on a playlist. Let's go back to Ohio for a second. By contrast, that was a song that was banned on a few AM stations, but there were enough little FM stations, especially in the larger cities and college towns, that the song was able to flourish and disseminate and proliferate and make it to the top 20 on the Billboard charts. It found broad mainstream appeal by way of the radio. And this is simply an impossibility these days. It just doesn't work that way anymore. We've been talking about corporatization already, but we're going to go a little further. We're going to talk about record labels. The rise of album sales in the 1960s made it pretty clear pretty quickly to the recording industry that it could be quite a lucrative business. It could really turn a profit. And from that point, the process that we just described with the snaffling of the radio stations commenced with record labels. These are the words of Danny Goldberg, who was the CEO of Artemis Records. The record business starting in the late 60s became a part of big business, and in particular it was a huge part of the growth of Warner Communication. Steve Ross recognized that the music business could throw off huge amounts of cash, and he used the cash after he acquired Atlantic and Elektra and built up Warner Brothers Records, and created what was then the biggest record company in the world, Warner Music Group. Big corporations from that moment on were interested in record companies from the late 60s up until about 5 or 6 years ago. He said this in 2004. 5 or 6 years ago takes us to the advent of the internet. More on that shortly. And so you have Sony buying the CBS Music Group from CBS, and you have BMG buying the RCA record company from NBC. And it becomes one of the things on the multimedia corporate merger agenda. These days, there are functionally 3 record labels, aptly named the Big Three: Sony, Warner, Universal. Suddenly, the music industry is not about music, but about numbers. Here are some of David Crosby's thoughts. I quote, "When it all started, record companies, and there were many of them, and this was a good thing, were run by people who loved records. People like Ahmet Ertegun, who ran Atlantic Records, because they were record collectors. They got in it because they loved music. The people who run record companies now wouldn't know a song if it flew up their nose and died."
Now, most record company presidents are complete assholes.
The man had a way with words. Because business revolves around quarterly returns and pleasing shareholders, we now find that record labels don't stick with an artist long enough for them to find their feet, and that can take 2 to 3 albums sometimes. Once again, we're going to revisit Ohio, which, to reiterate, from the moment of it being written to the moment of it being released for consumption by the public, was less than 2 weeks.
What we wanted to do was bring it out instantly now. We were angry now. The kids were angry now. We wanted to speak and scream about this now.
When we finished recording it, he took tape and flew to New York on a red eye. And he said, I want this out now. And he pulled all the stops. Cover was a picture of the Constitution with 4 bullet holes in it.
There's no way in hell that a modern label would allow that kind of turnaround. And that's even if a band had made it past the signing and not been dropped after their first album. Dropped or shelved, which is worse. And the third of the 3 horsemen of the music apocalypse is the fracturing of media. There used to be a musical monoculture. There was less diversity in the market, but music was a shared cultural experience. The internet shattered that musical monoculture, beginning with peer-to-peer file sharing apps like Napster and LimeWire and Kazaa. It absolutely laid waste to any concept of a monoculture, as much as I, in my very early teens, loved to wait for 3 days for a song to download on Kazaa. It was maybe not the best thing for music. This meant that the labels were no longer the tastemakers. It meant that the listener could bypass that gatekeeping. Nowadays, there are so many ways to discover new music. There's Bandcamp and SoundCloud and blogs and NPR Tiny Desk concerts. And there is still the radio, and there is still physical media, thank God. YouTube, streaming. And the result of that is that there is much more diversity, but far less of a shared cultural experience of music. There is so much new music being constantly churned out that it is very, very difficult to meaningfully engage with any of it. The algorithmic model means that your listener profile is decided by the algorithm and you are locked into it. You end up trapped in an echo chamber of the music that the algorithm thinks you might like. Additionally, scrolling culture and the attention economy make it nearly impossible to capture and keep everyone's attention, long enough for a protest song to really take hold. For the last time, Ohio was only available on the radio or as a single. It wasn't even available on an album until their compilation album was released so far in 1974, I think. I think that's correct. If you couldn't buy the single, the only way you could hear the song was listening to it on the radio. But because the radios had DJs, you could call them up and request that they played the song. It wasn't on a playlist. It was chosen by these disc jockeys. Everyone was listening to the same music together. And now, everyone's listening to incredibly disparate music alone. This takes us to the answer of that central question. Where has the protest music gone? The purpose of a protest song is to promote community solidarity and spread awareness. The purpose of record labels is to turn a profit. And given the structure of our capitalist society, often these record labels are part of the system that protest music seeks to critique. In the words of musicologist Tammy Kernodle, I quote, "When we started to move into the last decades of the 20th century and in the first decade of the 21st century, those messages, that is, the messages of social change, started to be filtered out because of the infrastructure and how music became so vastly commodified because of globalization. The industry began to work against it. In essence, the intentions of protest songs and of the structures that would distribute them to the masses are fundamentally at odds." I don't mean to sound all doom and gloom, so let's look to the future of protest music. I said it was nearly impossible for a protest song to capture and hold the attention of a large population. But the thing is that the flip side to doom scrolling and the attention economy is virality. Media like YouTube can propel a piece of music across borders. Let's take, for example, the song El Violador Eres Tú. This song and dance was written in opposition to violence against women. It began in South America, I believe. But it went viral on YouTube, and it spawned a global protest song phenomenon. let's take a smaller, more recent example. There's an artist named Jesse Wells who posts videos on TikTok and Instagram where he's playing an acoustic guitar and singing these short satirical songs.
Now they'll circle the wagons, drape the man in a flag, and say don't trust what your eyes can see.
This man, who is young, this young man, has 3 million followers across Instagram and TikTok. He was nominated for 4 Grammys this year, and he has played alongside no other than famous protest singer, continuing to fight the good fight, Joan Baez.
You say you're looking for someone. No kings, no kings, no kings.
He is not attached to a label. I don't follow him, but he recently showed up on my feed. I think this kind of exposure is the closest thing that we have to a monoculture these days. And this humble, earnest man with a guitar on your phone mimics protest music in its most rudimentary form. On paper, this is the same music as that of the Greenwich Village folkies of the 1960s, of Pete Seeger and Woody Guthrie, the generation before them, of the union organizers of the 1930s, and of the early bards and balladeers who influenced them.
You know, in the Middle Ages, we used to be the couriers, the town criers, the people who carried the message from town to town, and the troubadours. And this was us doing that part of our job as well as we ever did it. That was probably the best we ever did it.
I think from this we can conclude that so long as people the world over strive for equity and truth and justice, the protest song will remain timeless. And that's it for me. If you enjoyed this episode or you would like to support any of the weird things I do, including but not limited to this cover of the Abbey Road medley that I did at the end of last year, I'll leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you are most welcome to make a donation if you wish, but no pressure, my friends. Thank you so much to everybody who has made a donation or signed up as a member. You are unofficially sponsoring this episode, so I hope you've enjoyed it. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, there will be a link in the description to that as well. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week for some White Album. We're going to be listening to one of my all-time favorite songs. Have a great weekend.
We knew that there were a whole lot of people like us who were shocked that 4 of America's children had been gunned down doing something they were legally allowed to do.